So we will start with a really short welcome, and then we will have a 15 minutes presentation, and then a Q&A for more or less 35 minutes. And we will have a little bit of a closing part of the 5 minutes. And you will see on your Zoom, you have different tools. One is a chat, and we invite you to use the chat to offer comments, insight, experiences, whatever you want to share with us and you think we should know about the trails. But then you have another small tool called Q&A. Please use the Q&A to type any question that comes to your mind, also during the presentation. We will be addressing them at the end of our presentation. So please type all the question you have, and we'll be super happy to reply to those. And before we really open up this open house webinar, I would like to begin with an acknowledgement to the Lapangan speaking people on whose territories our CRD building stands. We recognize and respect First Nation government across the region. We recognize the Songhees and the Esquimalt Nation in the core area, the Kwasanich Nation out on the Saanich Peninsula and the Gulf Islands, and to west, the Sianu, the Suk, and the Pachidat, all of whom have a long and standing relation with this wonderful land and sea waters that comes to these days. In my case, I'm especially grateful. I'm a new Canadian or a newcomer to this land, and I'm really grateful to be able to work, play, and live in this beautiful territory. So we have two amazing presenters today. The project manager of this project and a consultant we hired to help us through developing the project itself. We have Emma Taylor. She's a planner at the CRD and a project lead for the Regional Trails Widening and Lighting project. Emma has a professional experience in community planning, parks and trails, and public engagement. After her presentation, we will have Dan Casey, who is a transportation planner with Urban System. He has over 15 years of professional experience focusing in multimodal transportation, planning, and design. And he works in communities of all sizes throughout Western Canada. So we are really lucky to have this amazing presenter here today with us. And I will now let Emma start our journey.
Thank you, Bea. Welcome, everybody. As many of you are aware, CRD Regional Parks manages 3 regional trails in the capital region. We have the Galloping Goose that was constructed in the 1980s, and it connects Suk and Victoria. We have the Lochside Trail, constructed in the early 2000s, connecting Saanich and Sydney. And more recently, we have the ENN Rail Trail with 12 out of 17 kilometers constructed, connecting Victoria and the western communities. These trails are multi-use trails developed in former railway corridors. The corridors themselves are generally around 20 meters wide. They're owned by the province of BC under the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure. CRD holds a license to manage and operate the trails within these corridors. The Regional Parks Strategic Plan and the Regional Trails Management Plan provide direction for the management and operation of regional trails, whereas the Regional Transportation Plan and the Regional Growth Strategy set targets for active transportation in the region. So by the year 2038, we hope to see at least 30% of all trips in the region made by cycling or walking. Regional Parks also conducts visitor surveys to gauge public satisfaction with the regional trails. Recent survey results indicate the key issues on the regional trails are safety, speed, volume of users, a lack of lighting, as well as a lack of trail separation. for separating users on the trails. So the 2016 Regional Trails Management Plan identifies a number of priority actions for the Galloping Goose and Lochside trails specifically. So for the I'll start with the Galloping Goose. There's an action to compare options for widening and separating the Galloping Goose between the Selkirk Trestle in the south and Grange Road near the McKenzie interchange. The Lochside, the plan directs us to assess the feasibility of widening the Lochside between the switch bridge at Uptown and McKenzie Avenue. And also it indicates that CRD should undertake a study on whether to light sections of the trails. So this map shows these priority areas identified in the Regional Trails Management Plan. These sections of trail are classified as bike and pedestrian trails, where both active transportation and recreation are given a preference. So to follow up on these priority actions, in 2020, the CRD hired a team of consultants from Urban Systems and PBX Engineering to study options for widening, separating, and lighting these sections of trails. The consultants provided the CRD with the study and recommended a separated use pathway design with lighting. The CRD board received this report earlier this year and is now asking for public input. So I'll now turn it over to Dan Casey from Urban Systems to provide detail on the study and the recommended separated use pathway with the lighting options.
Excellent, thank you, and I appreciate that. So I'm going to spend a few minutes here walking through some of the key technical activities that were undertaken in producing the study, and then zero in on some of the critical takeaways and recommendations. So the study was focused on opportunities to make improvements to this 6.6 kilometer section of regional trail. Some of the key opportunities that were being considered were providing more space to accommodate more people walking, rolling, and cycling, opportunities to improve safety at trail junctions and road crossings, opportunities to create comfortable conditions for travel on the trails at different speeds, as well as to improve safety, personal security, and comfort for users on the trails. So with that in mind, a series of background technical activities were undertaken. One of the things that was done through the study was understand the volume of trail users using the trail today. If we maybe just advance back one slide, there's counts were undertaken in 2019 to establish a baseline for trail user volumes. The trail user volumes were separated generally into the three segments. So the portion of the Galloping Goose between Selkirk Trestle and the Switch Bridge near Uptown was found to have approximately 2,700 trail users each day. The portion of the Galloping Goose to the west between Switch Bridge and west of the McKenzie Avenue interchange at about 1,500. And then about 2,000 daily trail users for the section of the Lochside Trail north of Switch Bridge to McKenzie Avenue. Worth also noting that the approximate breakdown of trail users is approximately 80% cyclists and about 20% people walking and rolling. So with that in mind, some projections were developed to try to understand and project out what the total trail user volumes might look like out to 2040. An average growth rate of 2.5% per year, so year over year, was estimated based on historic patterns in trail user volume growth on the trails in past, consideration of regional population projections, impacts the improvements on the trails could have over time in terms of encouraging new trail users, as well as changes in lifestyle around prioritization of healthy living, low carbon transportation. So with those items in mind, projections applied to the corridor increased projected 2040 volumes to, I believe it was about 4,500 trail users per day, for the busiest section of the Galloping Goose, about 2,500 for the portion between Switchbridge and McKenzie interchange, and about 3,500 for the section of Lochside Trail north of Switchbridge to McKenzie Avenue. Another piece of technical work that was undertaken was to understand the operating characteristics and basic dimensions of trail users. So the diagram on the left is highlighting what some of the key dimensions are for different types of pedestrians. Critical to this was understanding the width or the dimensions associated with a person using a wheelchair, a person using other mobility aid, or people pushing strollers, for example. That really being a baseline for understanding what some of the desirable dimensions might be for pedestrian facilities. Similar understanding developed for cyclists, shown on the right side of the screen, and really it's about acknowledging the exact width of a bicycle and a person on a bicycle, but also noting that we don't necessarily ride in straight lines, and we need a little bit extra distance width in order to pass or travel side by side. Another key trail user characteristic is speed. And so understanding the difference in speed between the different trail user types. Diagram on the screen is showing typical, this is typical, but typical walking speed of approximately 5 kilometers per hour, contrasted with the typical operating speed for a cyclist of 20 kilometers per hour and sometimes more when we're talking electric bicycles or you're more confident cyclists. So really having a handle on not only how many people are using these trails, but how quickly the different user groups are traveling. Also developed through the study an extensive inventory of the baseline condition. Important to understand when we're considering what future improvements could be to what's in place today. So the map on the right-hand side of the screen is color-coded based on current trail width. The segments highlighted generally in red and orange are the more narrow segments currently in place. So between 3 and 4 meters, you start to see basically the entire stretch of the Lochside Trail within the study area, as well as significant portions of the Galloping Goose south of Switchbridge and Uptown. We do start to see the areas in dark blue and lighter blue that are upwards of 4.5, 5 meters in width. We do see a fair bit of that western segment of the Galloping Goose, primarily related to improvements that have made nearby McKenzie Avenue. Also important to consider some of the site-specific constraints along the corridor. So those being 6 different underpass locations, 5 different bridges or trestles, as well as a series of steep slopes, rock cuts, and retaining areas where potential widening is made more challenging with some of the physical constraints that are in place. So with that baseline technical information in place, as well as research into industry guidelines and best practices from other communities, a series of trail configuration options were developed. They're shown on the screen in front of us. Option 1 was a widening of the current trail facility, so retaining the mixed use function of the trail, but widening. Option 2 was to actually provide 2 separated operating spaces within the trail, so a separated use pathway. One portion would be dedicated to accommodating people on bikes, the other for people walking and rolling. And finally, option 3, which was again separated pathway facilities, but then with a center boulevard actually physically providing lateral or physical separation between the 2 facilities. So with those options in mind, an option evaluation exercise was undertaken, the goal of which was to understand and compare the benefits and disbenefits of each option relative to one another to help guide study recommendations around which configuration option to move forward. Some of the factors and criteria that were considered included capital costs, impacts or improvements on trail user comfort, trail user experience, improvements or addressing trail safety concerns and conflict between trail users, potential environmental impacts associated with each option, the overall quality of facility that could be achieved through each of those options, the constructability or the ease of which each could be achieved, with the dimensions of the facilities that are being shown. And then finally, implications related to maintenance and ongoing operations that would be associated with each option. So the study went through an options evaluation exercise using the criteria shown here, and led toward a conclusion and a recommendation that the option 2, the separated pathway option, was the preferred option to move forward with. This includes separated facilities for people walking and rolling, separate from people cycling. It includes a bike path width of 4 meters and a separated walkway width of 2.5 meters, both allowing for side-by-side travel and passing within those facilities. And the result is a total trail width of 6.5 meters, which is generally an increase from the current width of between 2 and 3 meters, albeit with variation along the whole. Consideration was given to phasing of improvements, so to identify which segments of trail improvement ought to be pursued first. The visual on the right side of the screen is identifying the recommended order of pursuing improvements or of priority. So in descending order, the highest priority was the southernmost section of the Galloping Goose, where we see some of the more narrow current trail widths, as well as the highest trail user volumes. Second priority was the portion of Galloping Goose through Switchbridge to the trail junction, and then extending north along the Lochside Trail to Saanich Municipal Hall. Third priority, the segment of the Lochside Trail from Saanich Municipal Hall to the north, where we see some of the narrowest current trail dimensions. Fourth priority, the segments of Galloping Goose west of Uptown and the Switchbridge. And then finally, last priority, fifth priority, being the section west of Tillicum Road, where some improvements have been made recently as part of the McKenzie interchange project. So the other key component to the study was consideration of trail lighting. And so the study considered various advantages and disadvantages associated with possible trail lighting. Some of the key advantages of lighting include an increase in user comfort and safety on the trails, the enhancement of the ability for trail users to navigate and wayfind throughout the trail system, the ability to better recognize and then avoid conflicts between trail users, enhancement to personal security and safety while using trails, as well as the likelihood of and the ability to deter deviant activities or behaviors within those trail corridors. Important to also acknowledge some of the disadvantages and the challenges, cost being one. There's both the capital costs associated with installing lighting, as well as the ongoing costs associated with operating and maintaining lighting. There are concerns over lighting spillover into adjacent properties or activities and the impact more broadly on dark sky objectives. There are also concerns over impacts to the environment and natural habitats. And then finally, the potential for lamp standards at the trail edge to be a possible hazard or obstacle in the case a trail user would need to exit the trail. So with those considerations in mind, the study does recommend the preferred lighting scenario shown on the screen to the right. So that being lighting the full sections of the project study area, with the exception of the portion of the Lochside Trail nearby the Swan Lake nature area. The recommended lighting scenario includes light emitting diode LED lights, which are energy efficient and also effective, and further consideration to be given to lighting dimming technologies and motion sensing to ensure that lighting is both effective throughout various seasons and times of day, as well as ensure it is efficient as possible, offering light when light is needed. So that sums up some of the key recommendations, key takeaways from the study, and I'm going to pass it back to Emma to talk about next steps.
Thanks for that, Dan. Yeah, so I'm going to outline a few of the anticipated next steps prior to opening up the floor for some questions. So we are in the public engagement phase of the project. So there is an online survey available right now on the CRD website. It's available until midnight, June 13th. For public to provide their feedback. So I do encourage you all to participate and take the survey. We'll be reviewing the feedback to determine the level of support for the separated use pathway design, for the lighting, and for the priority implementation sequence. So we expect that a report will be presented to the CRD board this fall that includes the public feedback results and seeks direction for proceeding in some way or not with the project. So if the board does deem that there's support to proceed, funding would need to be secured through successful grant applications and an approved budget, and possibly partnerships with municipalities. So we are very early on in this consideration of the project. And we're here tonight to take any questions and your feedback, and I'll pass it back to Beatrice now to facilitate some of your questions.
Thank you so much. We are now receiving some of your questions, and I will read them and address them to Emma and to Dan. So our first question is, and I think both of you can give some insight, but maybe Dan, you know more. It's what are you doing to preserve urban forest along the route you are widening?
Suppose I could say the study that was undertaken, it was done at quite a high level, and it was really about cross comparison of options to narrow to a preferred option. A subsequent next step would be a further level of design refinement that would take into consideration impacts on natural space, on trees, and work to preserve and avoid those impacts to the extent possible. I think in terms of the work is where it's at right now, that it's really not at the level where we can confidently comment on those impacts or quantities or with any level with any degree of detail, really.
Yeah, I can add to that as well, that the environmental impacts were certainly an evaluation criteria considered, and the separated use pathway was deemed to have a reasonable balance of fewer environmental impacts in terms of tree removal than the separated use path with the wide, the center boulevard option. So the Regional Trails Management Plan does identify these regional trails as greenway corridors, so certainly valuing the natural greenway character. So preserving vegetation in the corridors is a priority of CRD regional parks. And if this project does advance to a detailed design drawing, we would have more specific information about vegetation impacts, and it would also include an environmental assessment at that time.
So this is more for you, Emma. Did this project include the completion of the ENN rail trail?
So the projections for the trail users, did the projections include the completion of the ENN rail trail is the question. So Dan can weigh in here, but the projections certainly considered the development of other active transportation infrastructure around the capital region. So bikeways in the city of Victoria, the development of the ENN, and other opportunities other than the regional trails for walking and cycling. So that did factor in more of a general sense to some of the trail user counts.
I would echo that. I think there's sort of two lines of thinking. One is build out of great active transportation facilities like the INN and some of the facilities that are going in place in some of the municipal streets might have the potential to both, other folks who might have otherwise been trail users might be using those facilities. But on the other side of things, I mean, generally the development of these great facilities is going to lead just generally to more people out cycling and walking. And so consideration was given to that in a general sense in the projections that were developed, and ENN being a part of that.
Another question, and this could be for both of you. It's, could a barrier be installed afterwards if cyclists are using the pedestrian lane?
Yeah, I think it could. Want to really, if that became a challenge, an issue, you'd really want to understand the nature of that challenge and the magnitude and frequency of it. There are drawbacks to doing so, and that being a hazard in the center of between the two trail facilities, I suppose. There are, I think the question specifically was, could a barrier be put in place? There are other mitigations that could be put in place, as well as or instead of a barrier that might not present the same level of physical hazard or obstacle. And we do see these on other facilities, just almost like things like texture in the asphalt, rumble strips. You can do landscaping. You can do things if that became a challenge, became an issue.
One of the benefits of the option 2 separated use pathway is that in some areas where the trail corridor doesn't have constraints, that there may be a possibility of putting in a center boulevard in some locations. It was just deemed cost prohibitive, and there being many other challenges with doing the boulevard throughout, but that could be a consideration for heavier traffic areas as well.
Guys, our attendees are asking you to speak a little bit louder. It seems that it's a little bit muffled. So okay. Could you briefly repeat what you said, screaming it loud like an Italian, as I do? So can you repeat a little bit about the barrier, really succinct, so that we make sure that they understood?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So with respect to barrier dividing pedestrian and cycling facilities, I think, that is a possibility if issues of one user group veering into the other user group space becomes a challenge. We are not recommending that be part of the initial design, but of course there are mitigations like that can be pursued in future if the need is warranted. I think I also touched on, I think the question was, could barrier be installed? I think there are a number of different possible mitigations, barrier being one of them, but other more subtle installations that could be pursued instead if that were a challenge that needed to be addressed. And so we have seen some of those even around the region here on other facilities, like just textured asphalt that differentiates spaces. And you can do things with rumble strips and landscape and all sorts of things that can help reinforce the two facilities as distinct from one another.
CRD is also strong on trail etiquette, promoting proper use of the trails so that everyone can enjoy their experience. So part of a trail improvement project would be a trail etiquette campaign as well.
So, Dan, we have another question for you, and please scream it out. It's, will the Selkirk Trestle be lit as well, as it is dangerous in the dark between bike riders and walkers?
So Selkirk Trestle was not explicitly considered through this particular study. I personally am actually not aware or up to speed, I suppose, on any previous work and consideration for lighting in that location. I would say, or I could say that as lighting is pursued within the study area, if it were, an extension to include the Selkirk would be entirely possible.
So Regional Parks does manage the Selkirk Trestle. So because the recommendations for lighting in this study were to focus on the high need areas, such as underpasses and trestles, it would be likely that the Selkirk would be considered for lighting if it is deemed an unsafe or insecure environment.
So this is a long one, so bear with me as I kill all the pronunciation. Priority 1 is Switch Bridge Selkirk. It's convergence of two trails into one, Galloping Goose and Lochside. There is another convergence, Hell's Gate. This is Galloping Goose and the ENN from Langford to Viroya. When will this be widened for pedestrians?
So the area where the Galloping Goose and Lochside trails converge just north of the Switch Bridge at Uptown was part of this study area, and this widened separated use pathway is proposed at that location. The area that this author is referring to, where the Galloping Goose and ENN trail converge, is not part of this widening and separating and lighting study.
Okay, next question. And this can go either ways, either you, Dan, or Emma. How will you discourage pedestrians from walking in the section of the trail dedicated to cyclists?
So again, I think this comes down or back to CRD Regional Parks and CRD Regional Planning, too, are very much involved in promoting trail etiquette, again, also offering some incentives such as handing out bike bells and encouraging cyclists to use bells when they're passing to alert pedestrians of the approach, and other messages about sharing the trail.
Maybe this is more for you, Dan. Light spillovers really like trespass and causes increased sky glow. Light at night, I link to adverse health effects. Have the factor been considered?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's a consideration that absolutely came up through the development of the study. Newer lighting technologies, newer lighting infrastructure can go a long ways toward mitigating those concerns. Lighting that projects downward rather than outward, lighting that projects at appropriate lighting levels for the facility it's lighting. And some of the, even the LED technologies now include technologies that can project light that is warmer in color, which is less harsh, less aggressive on the eye, and less disperses to a lesser extent. And so we are very confident, and we do have a local electrical engineering consulting group, PBX Engineering, who undertook that portion of the study, who specialize specifically in these sorts of installations. And so they've assured us that this concern can be mitigated.
Did you also want to touch briefly maybe on the options for dimming and timing for the lights? Yep.
There are a few opportunities available as these, if and as the lighting is comes forward. And so dimming technologies, which will ensure that the appropriate amount of light is thrown, depending on the conditions at that point in time. So in the depths of winter, you might project more light as things are darker. When it's lighter out or dusk or dawn, it'll project the correct amount of light for those conditions. With remote sensing technologies, there are technologies that you can program, and they will detect when trail users are approaching, and throw light when the light is needed, and not throw light or pull the level of light that's given back when it's not needed. So there are a lot of things that can be done to mitigate that concern.
Another question, and this, Emma, is a little bit more for you. Will the big trail maps be updated to include all recent trail developments, ENN, midstream, and this widening section?
Certainly, someone has a keen eye for maps, it sounds like. Regional Parks does do regular updates to the maps, even though the map we have behind us here is likely out of date, as the ENN trail construction is ongoing, and if any other reroutes or say the widening project happens, our maps will certainly be updated on a regular basis.
So I will read this question, but it might be a little bit unclear. So help me, who wants to respond to this? Could consideration be given to using option 1 for some areas of the trail where loss of shrub cover and trees would be significant with the wider option 2, particularly Swan Lake and Swan Trestle to Quadra? So I think that the question is like, instead of having just option 2, could in some places option 1 be used instead to save some of the shrub and the trees? I think this was the question, but
yeah. So it's certainly actually a question we're posing to you in the survey in terms of which sections of trail do you support or not support the separated use pathway on. So yeah, nothing is set in stone at this point, as I described in the presentation. And again, with that implementation, if the separated use pathway was to be implemented over time, it would be a staged approach. We do recognize that Swan Trestle to Quadra section does have some significant constraints with the trestles, and it is already quite a narrow corridor with constraints. So hopefully that answers the question.
And since we have the opportunity, I remind you the service is on until the end of next week, Sunday the 13th. And please share the knowledge with others, tell them to take the survey. We have another webinar on Monday, so please stay engaged and let us know. And I now pass to the next question, which can be, I would say, mostly for Emma, but that can come in too if you want. So the question is, I didn't notice mopeds in your presentation. They are increasing in numbers and going very fast. What will be done about their increased numbers with regard to safety for walkers?
Very, very good question, and certainly very relevant on the regional trails as we see new types of motorized devices coming on the market and becoming more popular. So currently, CRD Regional Parks' regulation is that all bicycles or mobility devices have to be pedal assist. They can't be fully motorized unless it's for a physical need. So that is our current regulation, and we do have officers enforcing on the trail. The number of officers has increased recently, and especially during COVID-19 times with increased use in our parks and trails.
The next one, Dan, is definitely for you. Has the effect of dark adaption and changes to visual ability due to slow visual adaptation to light changes been considered, particularly at cycling speed?
I would say generally it has, and the work that was undertaken in developing the study was developed with international standard and best practice in mind. And so it's IES standards, and so those do generally consider a wide range of considerations with respect to lighting. I think with this one specifically, I myself am not a specialist necessarily in lighting, and so it is a question we could actually take away and consider in a little more detail, I would say, as well.
It was one reason that the motion sensor lights were not recommended, though, in terms of that ability to adjust your eyes quickly from dark to light conditions.
Dan, another for you. South of the Selkirk Trestle, I often see walkers in the bike lanes, as there is no obvious sign telling user where to walk. Will there be some way of showing user where they should be?
It's a really good comment, and so yes, now the work that was undertaken was high level and didn't really get into specific location of signage and whatnot, but facilities like this should include, it's a standardized green sign that would indicate which side the pedestrian goes, which side the cyclist goes. And so if you visit facilities, Falls Creek in Vancouver, facilities up on the waterfront in Nanaimo, they've installed this standardized signage. And so we would be looking to see something similar here.
And Dan, just to clarify, that's signs on signposts as well as painted signs, yes, on the tread.
Correct, yes.
So this is a little bit longer question, so bear with me. Can you try and design segments with generous right-of-way to accommodate further expansion or elements of option 3 separation? Average volumes projected for 24 are not much higher than numbers recorded on high use days in summer months, and capacity should accommodate maximum expected trip volumes more so than average number of trips.
I mean, I would say generally the right-of-way width that is in place can accommodate wider trail facility widths than are being proposed here. And so by no means is what's being talked about with the 6.5 meter separated facility, by no means longer term are we necessarily limited to that. There is, I think in all cases or in most cases, there is the right-of-way width in place to go further still.
I think this person is asking about the buffer or the boulevard option as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the option 3.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, what's being shown with the separated facilities side by side, I mean, absolutely could be pushed out still to include that buffer space if and when that were warranted. I think the primary drawback to that option 3, the boulevard separated option, was the added width for the overall trail facility, and things like increased capital costs and concerns for impact on adjacent natural spaces start to come into play. And that's primarily where the option 2, the side-by-side separated facilities, was identified as the preferred option.
As work is being conducted, will measures be taken to address trail offshoots that people have created, or like on marked side path, as shortcuts in order to deter collisions? And lighting would definitely decrease this possibility as a first step.
Yeah, I can take a first cut at that question. So as I mentioned, the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure does own that corridor for the Galloping Goose and the Lochside, and they do issue other people licenses of occupation within the corridor. So the CRD regional trails are not the only license holder. So some of those offshoot trails intersecting with the regional trails may be official licensed trails that perhaps a municipality manages, or they may be unofficial. And it is my understanding that a review is being done of which ones are, may need to have their license renewed, or trails being, disbanded perhaps.
So that the next one could be more for you, Emma. The trail widening between Quadra and Saanich Road will have significant impact on wildlife values in the riparian zone of the Blackfin Creek. The trail is considered between rocky outcrops and steep banks down to the stream. Significant disruption and loss of habitat will occur only to have a choke point at the trestle. Why widen this section where the habitat loss is most critical for so little gain with the trestle constriction?
Yeah, so certainly environmental assessments would need to be done prior to any trail widening construction activity, and CRD would pursue that and do a detailed design to address those environmental considerations. Certainly some geotechnical work as well if there's steep banks. And it's standard practice to do an archaeological assessment as well. If there's significant constraints or issues, then certainly we would have to factor those in.
Another for you, Dan, on lighting. Has it been considered that lighting will likely result in an increase in cycling speeds with increased danger of collision and injury?
Yeah, I mean, some consideration would have been given to that. I think the approach, though, and the belief is that illumination on the facility will actually increase, well, it could increase in speeds. That's, to be determined, I would say. A cyclist or a pedestrian would be able to detect potential conflict further in advance, and therefore have a greater time to react and avoid a collision or a conflict. So that really is the hope, and one of the underlying thoughts behind one of the key, really kind of the key priorities or objectives around lighting the trail is really to help provide more time to actually avoid those conflicts.
And to increase the hours that people can use the trail, especially in the winter months when it gets dark early, to have the extra light to safely travel to and from your destination.
So I will pose this question, but it might be a little bit out of topic, but Emma, I think you may help us too. They say safety measure that could be implemented immediately on all the trails would be to have pedestrians walking on the left so that they can see approaching traffic, as current etiquette proposals do not work.
Certainly that's a comment that we can take back for consideration. The current trail configuration is, as you're well aware, the multi-use trail where pedestrians and cyclists share the lane. So a revamp perhaps of the trail etiquette messaging is perhaps appropriate. Thank you.
So this is a little bit the opposite of what we heard before, but I want to bring it forward as well, and Dan, you can respond to that too. It seems unsafe to leave the Swan Lake section of the trail unlit. Why is that not included in the lighting plan? Is there a way to mitigate impacts that would allow for lighting?
It's a good question, a good comment, and I think all of this is still to be confirmed as this project advances. I think the rationale behind excluding it from the corridor illumination was around the possible impacts and really maybe the uncertainty of those impacts on surrounding natural areas. The study scope did not include environmental, and that is more than likely a follow-up step if illumination through that section were to be considered. I think I don't disagree with the comment that it would aid in trail user comfort and safety as lighting would along the rest of these corridors, but it really was that the uncertainty and the uncomfort around the impacts on natural areas through that segment as to why it was not recommended.
Yeah, so it is the CRD's intention to seek a balance in that Swan Lake corridor section between wildlife values and public safety considerations. So the study does put forward a recommendation for some alternative types of lighting in that section that could be things such as reflective tape or low level lighting of some type.
So we're nearing the end and we still have some questions. So I will try to get the one that we haven't touched on at all and then see if there is still time for the others. So will you install warning sign when the 3 lanes come back down to 2, like lots of pedestrian section? I expect conflicts in these areas.
Great comment, great concern being stated, and a response would be yes. Typically, any transition in facility type like that would be accompanied by, it's typically an amber warning sign, as well as the potential for a pavement marking that would also warn the trail users of a change in configuration that's coming up.
So I will try to summarize this because it might be our last question as we're getting toward the end. One of our recurrent user comments that during Bike to Work Week, there is a lot ongoing as educational events, but not much afterwards. So he asked, perhaps some educational session sharing the experiences resulting from the lack of safety skills, and should we do more education session to make sure people is safe and mindful after Back to Work Week?
Great idea.
So the other question are, I would say, more general questions. They also ask if it's possible to have a discussion with about the complex technical light issue with the light experts, which I don't think everyone wish to have in this room, but maybe Dan, you can take this question.
So, sorry if I can repeat.
Someone wants to have a really detailed discussion with the technical lighting experts.
So my suggestion for this individual is to go onto the CRD website, crd.bc.ca/trails project, and there's a contact us email form there that you can submit your contact information and your request to get in touch with the lighting professionals, and we'll do what we can to connect you with the appropriate people. Thanks for your interest.
There was again a question about will there be signing, especially for tourists who may not be knowing about etiquette and rules and may stop and take pictures. So will there be general other signs to make people aware of changes in?
Yes, certainly the visitor service, visitor experience piece that would be needed to accompany a trail infrastructure upgrade is definitely recognized. And again, that would be something put forward to the CRD board as considerations for if this project proceeds, as a major consideration for implementation.
And Emma, could you repeat the web address to contact? I think
yeah, we
were too quick.
We have a final slide. Maybe Bea could share that with everybody. The CRD website link.
Sorry, my technological abilities are super limited. Here.
So this web page is where you can access the online survey. We will be posting the recording of this webinar on the website. There is another webinar on Monday from noon to 1. So encourage your friends to join if they weren't able to connect tonight. And there's also some supporting documentation there about the project, as well as our contact us link.
So we can squish in a last little question. They ask if there are plans to increase the proposed areas of interest, like Grange Road is currently until due to the huge wall constructed as part of the McKenzie interchange project.
Yeah, so this study area was identified in the 2016 Regional Trails Management Plan as extending only from the Selkirk Trestle to Grange Road on the Galloping Goose, because it's deemed to be that bike and pedestrian type trail where we have high volumes of people commuting as well as using the trail for recreation. So the policies in that plan deemed it to be the priority area to study widening and separating. It may be that a future review of that plan could identify other areas that are in need of changes or consideration.
So being cognizant that there are 2 minutes to 8 and you may be really willing to hit your Friday and enjoy the start of the weekend, we will close the session here today. There are still some questions that were in the chat that we didn't have the opportunity to respond. Please use the website and connect with us to send us those questions if we didn't have the opportunity to respond to them. I also invite you to look at the website because there are the trails management plans which respond to many of the questions related to speed, etiquette, and what is forecasted for future trail building widening studies. We have also done study on the webpage. So if you are really interested in the detail, please go ahead, download it, and connect with us if you have further questions. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are really grateful for your time, and we know it's on a Friday night, so we are especially grateful. We are here again on Monday, and connect with us through our webpage, take the survey, keep on engaged, and thank you so much. Thank you also to Dan and Emma to be here today, and to all the technical help we got to get through all this without sleeps. So thank you so much, and have a great end of your Friday.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.